The next week, Marcus passed her in the public square. She walked arm in arm with her new lover, head held high. She saw him, her steps slowed, eyes flickered. Maybe it was guilt, maybe pride, he couldn't tell. But Marcus didn't turn away. He didn't scowl or smirk. He simply bowed his head, calm and sincere. She blinked, confused. He kept walking. A student later asked him, "Weren't you furious? Didn't you want to shame her?" Marcus replied, "Why shame a shadow? She is no enemy, only a mirror." The student furrowed his brow. "A mirror?" Marcus nodded. "Her betrayal reflected my attachment, my ego, my misplaced expectations, and now, my freedom." He continued, "If I hate her, I remain chained. If I accept her as a teacher, then even her cruelty serves my growth." That night he wrote, "Forgiveness is not for them, it is for us, not because they deserve peace, but because we do." By refusing to curse her, he spared himself the poison. He didn't rewrite the past, he just refused to let it rot the present. The Stoic seeks not enemies, only insight, and sometimes the deepest insight wears a familiar face. The door closed behind her. He didn't follow, he didn't shout or collapse. Instead, Marcus walked to his writing table, lit a small oil lamp, and sat, not to escape the pain, but to understand it. Pain, to the Stoic, was never the enemy. Misjudgment was. He opened his notebook and wrote a single line. "She acted according to her nature. Will I act against mine?" The ache in his chest was real, like an invisible hand squeezing his ribs. But instead of resisting it, he studied it. Epictetus once taught, "It's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Marcus repeated this aloud, steadying his breath. The world hadn't ended, his value hadn't diminished, his control, his precious self-control, remained untouched. Out the window, the stars burned above the city, cold, eternal, silent. They reminded him that the universe owed him nothing, not love, not loyalty, only the opportunity to respond with reason. She had walked away. That was her freedom, but what he did next, that was his. He picked up his stylus and began to write. Not to forget her, but to remember himself. Marcus sat beneath the olive tree behind his home, alone but not lonely. The wind rustled the leaves above, and he closed his eyes, letting it pass through him like a whisper from the gods. What had he really lost? A companion? A promise? Or merely the illusion of control over another's choices? His friend, Lucius, found him there. "She made a fool of you," he said, arms crossed. "You should take her to court, ruin her." Marcus smiled softly. "A man can only be made a fool if he measures his worth by others' actions." Lucius scoffed. "So you'll do nothing?" "I'm doing everything," Marcus replied. "I'm reclaiming my mind." That afternoon, Marcus wrote, "He who governs himself is beyond betrayal, for betrayal assumes ownership, and I never owned her soul, only shared time with it." He felt no triumph, no righteousness, only clarity. If she left to seek something else, that was her nature unfolding. To resist it was to fight the river. But he was a Stoic, and Stoics don't thrash in the current. They float with purpose. One morning, months after silence, a letter arrived. Her handwriting, folded with care. Marcus held it for a long time before opening it. Not with dread, but with curiosity. Inside, her words spilled across the parchment like rainfall, regret, confusion, sorrow. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "You didn't deserve it. You were good to me. I was afraid." He read it once, slowly, then again, and then he placed it gently into the river. Not torn, not burned, just released, like a leaf set afloat. A student later asked him, did her apology mean anything? Marcus replied, "It meant nothing, and everything." Nothing, because his peace no longer depended on her words. Everything, because it showed he had changed. He could read her pain without owning it. In his journal, he wrote, "Forgiveness is not an exchange, it is an offering. I no longer need her to carry my past." He didn't feel triumph, he didn't feel closure, he felt freedom. She had spoken, and he had listened, but not to cling, only to confirm. He had already let go. The Stoic does not wait for others to make him whole. He arrives there first and greets their apology from a distance. One spring morning, Marcus received news. She had married. No note, no explanation, just a whisper through the city grapevine. A friend rushed to tell him, watching carefully for a reaction. Marcus only nodded and returned to his scroll. "Do you feel nothing?" the friend asked. I feel clarity, Marcus replied, because now I understand. She was never mine. She was only passing through. He walked through his garden, letting blossoms brush his fingertips. He didn't feel anger, not even sorrow, just the lightness that follows a long illness, when the fever breaks and you finally breathe again. In his journal he wrote, "Nothing truly belongs to us except our mind and our character. The rest is loaned by fate." She was a chapter, not the book, a turning point, not the conclusion. To mourn her was no longer necessary, not because she was unworthy of love, but because love no longer required possession. He whispered aloud, "You were never mine, and that is why I am finally free." The Stoic doesn't chain the past to the present. He lets go, fully, without regret. Because the greatest freedom isn't choosing who stays, it's releasing what was never truly ours. Marcus sat alone at dusk, the fading sun casting golden light across the tiled floor. The city murmured below, oblivious to his thoughts. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not to Jupiter, not to Fortuna, but inward. "May I govern myself as a wise king rules his land, with justice, clarity, and no cruelty." He was done praying for her to return. That had passed. Now he prayed for something greater, to rule the empire within. He remembered a line from Cleanthes, "Lead me, Zeus, or let me follow willingly." Marcus chose to follow, not her path, but the path betrayal had revealed. In his journal he wrote, "What is a man who cannot rule his thoughts? A king? No, a prisoner dressed in purple." Each day he woke with less bitterness, more resolve. He no longer fantasized about revenge or reconciliation. Those were chains. Now he craved only mastery of thought, of reaction, of desire. She had taught him instability. His response was stability. She'd brought chaos. He'd answer with calm. Because when the outer world spins, the Stoic builds stillness at the center. And in that stillness, Marcus crowned himself, not as a lover, but as a sovereign. Marcus stood at the edge of the sea, grey hair swept by salt wind, sandals buried in the sand. The waves crashed as they always had, indifferent, eternal, and so was he. He no longer recited her name, no longer remembered her face clearly. What remained was not pain or love, but wisdom. He thought back to the moment she'd betrayed him, how it cracked his world, how close he came to becoming someone bitter, broken, or vengeful. But instead, he chose stillness, he chose reason. He had not suppressed his grief. He had faced it, studied it, grown through it. And now, he didn't stand above love or beyond heartbreak. He stood beyond need. In the final line of his last scroll, he wrote, "What wounded me became my whetstone. What shattered me became my shape. I did not survive betrayal. I was forged by it." People called him wise, strong, stoic, but he never claimed greatness, only discipline, because he knew the truth. Strength isn't not breaking, it's knowing how to rebuild. And Marcus had rebuilt, not as who he was before her, but as someone no one could ever break again. The next day, Marcus walked through the city forum. He saw her, not alone. She was laughing, hand in hand with the very man she'd betrayed him for. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Hers hesitated, guilt or defiance, he couldn't tell. He bowed his head politely, then moved on. His heart stirred, but he did not let it rise. He did not follow. He did not look back. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Desire makes slaves, reason makes kings." Many would have burned with jealousy, crumbled into obsession, or plotted revenge. But Marcus had studied the Stoics since boyhood. What did Epictetus say? If you want to be free, desire nothing that depends on another. He repeated it like a shield, and it worked. He walked past beggars, merchants, drunkards, and lovers, all prisoners of passions they didn't recognize. But Marcus, he was free. He had loved her, yes, deeply, but he had never confused love with possession, and he would not allow memory to become a master. Later that evening he wrote, "She may have betrayed our bond, but I will not betray my reason." That was his victory, quiet, invisible, absolute, and no one could steal it from him. They couldn't defeat Cutalun in war. They couldn't outwit her in council, so her enemies chose the deadliest weapon left, rumor. Whispers began to spread like wildfire through the Mongol camps. Cutalun, they said, was sleeping with her father. It was a lie so vile, so taboo, that even speaking it aloud could spark execution. And yet, it worked. People started to look at her differently. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably in her presence. The respect she had earned, battle by battle, began to crack under the weight of slander. The story wasn't random. It was carefully planted by her rivals to destroy her image of honor. If they couldn't beat her sword, they'd break her with shame. Kaidu was enraged. He publicly denied the rumors, standing by his daughter with fire in his voice. "She is my blood, my pride, my greatest warrior. Let no dog speak her name in dishonor." But even a Khan's roar couldn't silence every whisper. Kutulun didn't flinch. Instead, she did the unthinkable. She offered to marry, to end the scandal, on her own terms. But not just anyone. Her new suitor was a prince, a rival, and very possibly, a spy. Marcus wandered the temple gardens at dawn. Dew sparkled on marble statues. The air smelled of laurel and wet stone. He paused before a statue of Fortuna, goddess of fate. Her wheel loomed behind her, ever turning. Was it fate that she left me, he asked silently, or my own blindness to who she truly was? But then he corrected himself. A Stoic doesn't ask why the world turns, he asks how to turn with it. In his notebook, he wrote, "Attachment is not love. Love flows freely. Attachment binds and bruises. He who clings suffers twice, once in the loss, again in the refusal to let go." He remembered the way she used to smile, how her hand fit in his, the warmth of her voice. Then, the lies, the withdrawal, the night she didn't come home. He breathed in deeply, then exhaled it all, not to forget, but to release. For the Stoics taught that clinging to what is gone is like dragging a corpse through life. And Marcus, he was done carrying ghosts. Love had ended, the moment had passed. Now began the greater task, living without illusion, and that, he knew, was true freedom. At the marketplace, whispers floated behind him like smoke. Her affair had become gossip, a scandal. People smirked as he passed. Marcus didn't flinch. He stopped at a fruit stall, chose 2 figs, and paid without a word. The vendor, wide-eyed with curiosity, said, "She disgraced you, philosopher. What will you do?" Marcus bit into a fig, wiped the juice from his lip, and replied, "Do? I'll digest it, like this fruit." The man laughed awkwardly, but Marcus was serious. "She followed desire. That's her burden. I follow reason. That's mine." He walked on, not hiding from the world's eyes, but inviting them to see something rare, a man wounded yet upright. Later, in his journal, he wrote, "The world is not cruel, it simply is. It offers pain and pleasure without promise. Expecting fairness from it is like asking the sea not to crash." The betrayal hurt, but the expectation that life should be otherwise, that was the deeper wound. And so, he healed by abandoning illusion. Not love, not beauty, but the false belief that anything external could be guaranteed. The empire was crumbling. Kaidu's territories, once fierce and united under his banner, were splintering. Rivals seized cities, former allies betrayed oaths, and Kutulun, weary but unbroken, prepared for one last campaign to restore her father's legacy and hold the steppe together. She rallied what remained of her loyal forces, veterans who had followed her since her first battle, young warriors raised on tales of her strength. They rode not for gold or glory, but for Kutulun. Her brothers mocked her efforts. "Let her chase ghosts," they sneered. But as her banners rose again over the steppes, fear returned to their hearts. She struck hard and fast, retaking outposts, restoring order, and sending rivals fleeing. But the steppe had changed. Unity was dying, and in every victory, she tasted ashes. By now she knew the truth. This war could not be won with muscle alone. Her enemies were not just men with swords, but time itself, custom, tradition, the invisible chains around every woman born to power. Still, she refused to stop, even if it broke her. As summer arrived, Marcus noticed the changes within himself more than those around him. He no longer flinched when someone mentioned her name. No spike in the chest, no tightening of the jaw, just silence. Not emptiness, but peace. His students watched him closely, wondering how he had emerged so whole. One asked, "Is your heart cold now, master?" Marcus smiled. "No, it is warmer than before because it no longer burns." Detachment, he explained, isn't apathy. It's not shutting doors, it's walking through them and knowing when to leave them behind. In his writings that night, he etched, "Love, when wise, expects nothing. It offers, it shares, it accepts when it must let go. That is not coldness, it is courage." He still remembered her laugh, her warmth. But memory was no longer a chain, it was a page turned. She had left a scar, yes, but scars do not bleed. They remind, they strengthen. And Marcus had chosen not to let love harden him, but refine him. The Stoic does not armor his heart in stone. He tempers it like steel, not to never love again, but to love without losing himself in the fire. No one knows exactly how Cutulin died. Some say it was illness, sudden, swift and cruel. Others whisper darker tales, poisoned wine, a blade in the dark, a betrayal from someone she once trusted. What is known is this: she died young, and her death shattered what remained of Kaidu's dream. There was no grand funeral recorded, no tomb that has ever been found. Her brothers offered no grand eulogy. The woman who had once stood beside a Khan, who commanded armies and defied centuries of tradition, was quietly erased from the official Mongol histories. But the people did not forget. Stories of her wrestling feats lived on in the songs of traveling bards. Nomads told tales of the warrior woman who never lost a match and never bowed to a man. Even Marco Polo, the famed Venetian traveler, wrote of her strength and unmatched skill in battle. And yet, the silence around her end speaks louder than the legends. Because when powerful women die, history often forgets them. Unless someone fights to remember, Cutulin's rise was a threat, not to her enemies on the battlefield, but to her own blood. Her brothers watched in silence as she outshone them in war, wrestling, and politics. Each victory she claimed was one more step away from their rightful inheritance. They called her arrogant behind closed doors, a woman playing warrior, a daughter acting like a Khan, but in truth, they feared her. She had their father's trust, and worse, she had the love of the Mongol soldiers. When Cutulin rode into camp, warriors straightened their backs and saluted. She wasn't just admired, she was respected. Kaidu's sons began to whisper. One brother suggested their sister be married off to a powerful ally to get her out of the way. Another proposed she be accidentally left behind in battle, but Kaidu would hear none of it. He still believed she was destined for greatness. And yet Cutulin wasn't blind. She saw the looks, she heard the rumors. She knew what ambition did to brothers when inheritance was at stake. So when her father fell ill with fever, she prepared not just for mourning, but for war. Rain fell hard that evening. Thunder cracked across the Roman sky. To many, it was a night for shelter and fear. But Marcus stood beneath the downpour, arms folded, face lifted. He let the cold water soak through his tunic, not as punishment, but purification, a ritual of sorts. Inside his chest, a storm had raged since her betrayal. Confusion, grief, even anger. But here, under the storming heavens, he welcomed it. "Let nature rage," he whispered. "I will not." A servant called from the doorway, offering a cloak. He declined with a nod. There is nothing to hide from. Later, drying by the fire, he wrote, "Emotion, like rain, will pass. But my mind is not a leaf to be tossed by wind. It is stone, if I will it." To live well, Stoics believed, one must live in accordance with nature, not in rebellion against it. Pain is part of that nature, so is betrayal, but so too is resilience. She had left chaos in her wake, but Marcus had chosen to meet it not with noise, but with stillness, because the Stoic is not unfeeling. While Cutulin defended her father's borders, her brothers gathered behind closed doors. Inside a candlelit yurt, thick with smoke and betrayal, a secret council formed. Its goal was simple: ensure no woman would ever sit on the Khan's throne. Noblemen, jealous generals, and distant cousins were all summoned. They shared meat, drank fermented mare's milk, and whispered plans. Cutulin, despite her victories, was dismissed as a threat to tradition. "A woman cannot command men," one spat. "She brings dishonor, not order," said another. They plotted to strip her of command, replace her with a male heir, and erase her influence once and for all. And worse, some wanted to tarnish her name before it was too late. But Cutulin's allies had ears in the council. That same night, a loyal scout slipped into her camp with a warning. "They're planning to break the oath to your father. They'll bury your name before he's even dead." Cutulin stared into the fire. This wasn't just a fight for a crown, it was a battle for legacy, for history itself. Years had passed. Marcus, now older, wiser, and quieter, sat in the courtyard as the sun lowered behind the hills. The shadows grew longer, but his mind remained clear. A former student approached. "Master," he said, "do you still think of her?" Marcus smiled gently. "I think of how I survived her." The student looked confused. Marcus continued, "I do not carry her. I carry who I became after her. She had once shattered him. Now, she was part of the soil in which he had grown." He did not regret the love, nor the pain, nor the betrayal, for they had forged something greater, unshakable peace. In his final notebook he wrote, "She left with noise, but I remained in silence. And in that silence, I discovered something louder than passion, truth." His peace was not a reaction. It was a choice, not a numbness, but a decision to no longer suffer over what he could not change. Others saw heartbreak, but he saw transformation. Because for the Stoic, peace is not what happens after the storm. Peace is choosing stillness, even as the storm begins. His name was Abdika, a foreign prince with fine robes, a honeyed tongue, and eyes that hid too much. He came not with armies, but with flattery and gifts, silk, spices, and promises. To many, he seemed the perfect match. Marrying him would silence the rumors, heal alliances, and give Cutulun a powerful protector. But Cutulun saw through his charm. He was too smooth, too eager. He didn't want her heart, he wanted her throne. Still, she played the game. She let him court her, let the nobles gossip, let her enemies believe she was softening. All while she quietly tested him, asking about war, strategy, loyalty. He stumbled, he lied. And then, one night, a soldier caught him speaking with one of her brothers under the cover of darkness. It was a trap, a setup, a betrayal. Cutulun summoned him in front of the entire court. She said nothing at first, just circled him like a lioness. Then she flung his golden ring back at his feet. "You came here for power," she said coldly, "but you forgot one thing. I never lose." And with that, she did what no royal woman had done before. She challenged her suitor to wrestle her in front of the empire. She didn't even flinch when she confessed it. "It just happened," she said, shrugging, eyes cold as marble. Most men would have raged. Some would have begged. Others collapsed, destroyed, but not him. He sat silent, motionless. The only movement was the slow rise and fall of his breath. His name was Marcus, named after the emperor, though he wasn't royal. A Stoic philosopher, quiet, disciplined, not unfeeling. Just trained. "You don't care?" she asked, laughing nervously. "Say something." He looked at her, eyes calm but piercing. "You've done what you think is right. I'll now do the same." She blinked. "So, that's it?" "No." He stood slowly. "That's acceptance, not apathy. You've chosen your path. I'll choose my peace." What she didn't realize is that betrayal isn't new, and neither is self-control. The ancient Stoics believed we can't control what others do, but we can control how we respond. This is the story of one man who lived that belief, who faced betrayal not with vengeance, but with virtue, and in the quiet stillness of his pain found the only true revenge, mastery over himself.